I'm Marvin Polis with the City of Edmonton, here at Edmonton City Hall, with another in a series of videos for The Way We Green. With me is Colleen Cassady, St. Clair, from the University of Alberta. And we're here to talk about biodiversity. But first, Colleen, tell me about yourself.
Sure. I'm a biology professor at the University of Alberta. I study animal behavior and conservation biology.
Terrific. Tell us, what is biodiversity?
It's a little word for a big concept. Biodiversity really is all forms of life that we know, plus several million forms that we don't know, and all of the ways those forms of life interact with each other, with their environment, and with us.
Well, how does the study of biodiversity apply in an urban environment?
I think it's really important in an urban environment, maybe most important there from a human point of view. Biodiversity in an urban environment provides all of the things that biodiversity provides on a global scale, but it does that in a way that we can sort of see and experience more readily. So one of the things biodiversity does is provide ecosystem services. These are things like cleaning our air, producing the oxygen from the plants, cleaning our water, creating the water through the transpiration of plants. All of the things like that that we don't even stop to think about, let alone put a value on, are provided by biodiversity. But biodiversity is also all the species that we can see and enjoy. It's all the natural places that we can see. In addition to these ecosystem services that biodiversity provides, and in addition to the species that we can see and enjoy, it's also the species that kind of make things work. So that beautiful flowering apple tree is pollinated by bees. We don't really stop to think about as being biodiversity, but if we were to lose the pollinators of the earth, we would lose with them something like 1/3 of all crop species. So heritage tomatoes that you might have growing in your garden, they're also pollinated by biodiversity. So biodiversity really is a lot of things for us. It's aesthetic things, it's recreational opportunities, it's also the ecosystem services, that word again, that we take for granted, but that are utterly essential to our life and the lives of other organisms.
Would it be true to say then that these things are really interrelated?
Yes, these things are very interrelated. More interrelated probably than we realize. There's an analogy in conservation biology that describes that interrelationship well, and it was uttered by a conservation biologist who said, you know, if we're going to start tinkering with ecosystems, surely the first rule of tinkering is to keep all the parts. And so when we lose species, we aren't really sure what other things we're losing with them. Individual species, but perhaps they're a keystone species, a species that has a disproportionate effect on an ecosystem, and the whole ecosystem could change with the loss of that one species. Or perhaps they're a species on which other species depend, and so with one species goes several other species that maybe haven't even been described to science, such is the case with a lot of parasites. Maybe we don't mind losing a few parasites, but if you add all of these species together, it really could be quite a major change to our Earth. Some people estimate that in the coming 50 years, we may lose 20 to 30% of the species that currently inhabit Earth.
Okay, now you mentioned tinkering. In an urban environment, haven't we already really tinkered with biodiversity?
Yes, we've really tinkered with biodiversity in an urban environment, for sure, more so probably than any other environment. But that's also where we're concentrated and where we may need biodiversity as a species most. It's already the case that almost half the global population, so half of 6.5 billion people, live in urban areas. And that's a new situation relative to the history of our species. We've never tried an experiment like this before, where we all live in urban areas that by definition have very little biodiversity. So why would we need this biodiversity to be right in the cities? You could argue maybe that the cleansing of air that vegetation does can happen outside the cities for our benefit. But research has shown that the trees in the city actually do that more effectively, probably because of their proximity to those pollutants. They might be 3 times more effective than vegetation outside the city is at that one ecosystem service. Now that's an ecosystem service, and of course concentrations of people have more need for these services, cleaning the air, cleaning the water, but they might also have more aesthetic need for biodiversity. So there's been quite a body of evidence accumulating now over the last many years showing how central access to biodiversity is for human health. One famous study found that people in hospital rooms who had a view of just a tree, one tree, recovered significantly more quickly than those who didn't have such a view. And you can see evidence of that knowledge in the design of the University of Alberta Hospital, which has views to the outside and to the inside of the not quite forested, but vegetated inner part of the hospital for many patients.
So you're saying that even though we live in an urban environment, we still need clean air, we still need clean water, we still need nice views?
Absolutely. We still need all those services: clean air, clean water, pollinators, stormwater retention, and filtering. We still need the production of oxygen that we breathe and the absorption of pollutants. CO2 arguably is one of the pollutants that plants absorb for us. They use the CO2 and they convert it into water vapor and oxygen, which we very much need. The creation of moisture, water vapor, is tremendously important to climates, and it can moderate climates even on a very small spatial scale. You might be familiar with the situation in northern Africa. Northern Africa, now a desert, was once forested. With the removal of the forest went the removal of a climate that could support a forest or crops. And one of the reasons northern Africa is now so depauperate as an environment is because of the actions of humans thousands of years ago. So we're playing out this kind of trajectory all over the world, including in our cities. Those are just the services, though. Let's think a little bit about the recreational value of biodiversity and the aesthetic value of it. Here in Edmonton, I think nobody would need to be told about the recreational value of biodiversity because we enjoy this enormous river, valley, and ravine park system. It is the largest park of its sort, probably in the world, a city-owned park that is contiguous, almost without interruption, from Devon to Fort Saskatchewan. You can get on your bike or walk and have a quality hiking or mountain biking experience that lasts for hours.
And you're saying that it is here because of biodiversity?
Well, it is biodiversity.
In itself.
It's providing those services, and it's providing those recreational opportunities, and it's providing that aesthetic enjoyment. So I don't know how many folks would be like me, but when I need a little bit of a break or a little bit of an inspiration, that's the first place I turn. I go for a nice walk in the river valley. And people all over Edmonton can do that because the river valley and ravine systems are really widespread through the city. That also is unusual and really well connected to one another. That connectedness is really important as well. Maybe we'll come to that later.
Why don't we come to it now?
Yeah, okay. One of the features of Edmonton's river valley and ravine system that's super important is the fact that it is connected. And by connected, I mean the way you can see it structurally connected. You can look at a map, you can look at Google Earth, and you can see this continuous band of forest with a few interruptions, but more or less contiguous, stretching all the way through the city. But more important than that structural connection is the functional connection that affords. That means that wildlife, and that would include plant species that are not very mobile, they can't move very far on their own. They can move maybe only short distances. Those populations are connected to each other through the entire reach. And we know from lots of other places on Earth that connected populations are healthier populations. Isolated populations tend to go extinct. So we still have in Edmonton some of the species you just don't expect to see in a city of 1 million people. We have a barred owl nesting in White Mud Ravine. That's pretty unusual in a city. People see coyotes all the time. Now, coyotes are kind of an interesting case. They're increasing in lots of urban areas. Nonetheless, they are a reminder of wildlife that many people find really exciting. They are a medium-sized carnivore that manages to live in cities. We have lots of deer in Edmonton. In fact, on the weekend, I saw some deer just off of 111th Avenue. And that seems like a crazy place for deer to be, but I could easily imagine how they got there from the Grote Ravine, which they might have accessed from the river valley. And it would be not very far through a well-treed, mature neighborhood to the location where I saw them, 111th Ave and 127th Street. And it's pretty urban.